Great, another huge family conversation, marriage and family. Last week we had kind of left off. We started a couple weeks ago or months ago at this point now with leadership strategy, and now we're kind of getting into the, I guess, emotional leadership side of leadership strategy. Is that's probably, I would say, from what we've already talked about last time, is that that's one of the biggest areas of concern in our culture and society and things that are shifting. But so I guess that's kind of what I'll call it, is kind of emotional leadership, and just kind of continue from there. But I won't take more time away from that. I know that we had kind of talked off camera a little bit about some questions just to kind of go into I guess, some more granular breakdown, some things a little bit more in examples, because I think the examples are how we best recognize maybe how some of these principles apply. But um, yeah, I'd love for you to kind of dive into it with me, Mom, and see where we go.
Hey, thank you. After we had our session last week, you and I, like you mentioned, talked, and it really stuck with me because I guess in my normal life, I have a lot of conversations with people, as I'm sure most people do, but I talk to women. Um, and so I was having just some, curious conversations about what they thought emotional maturity were and intelligence and the importance of certain values and principles that factor into that. And obviously, a lot of the women that I teach are about my age. And so one of the things that kept coming up, well, several things, but maybe just the top few, was self-awareness. Self-awareness at my age is kind of a critical thing, especially I had a lot of people say, one of the biggest challenges they had was transitioning as a woman in my position, mid like 50s, grandparent age now, and then dealing with adult children, and how in some ways and aspects dealing with younger children felt simpler. And as I parceled that out with them, they were like, well, I had more control and I had more say and I could, you know, do different things that made it so that things were more stable. And dealing with adult children becomes more challenging because you're in a different role. And so again, the self-awareness comes in to that. Like, how do I fit? What's my role? Dealing with different personalities that are adult personalities. And there's a delicateness to that that I think is really important. And within that delicateness is also, in my opinion, a very radical sense of honesty that you have to have with yourself and your goals and your future. Things that come into play oftentimes are like mind reading, thinking, okay, well, that's what that other person meant. You and I had kind of talked about that. We often attribute to ourselves the most generous, virtuous, magnanimous part of a conversation. That's super common, I think, for people. I just use the superlative on purpose. Like, I think it really is super common. Um, and then the judgment that we cast on someone because we want to be the hero, and it's easy to make someone else the villain. And so again, emotional maturity becomes kind of this script that we need to reference back to often, especially for ourselves, to understand how we're operating within our relationships. And we think one thing, maybe we're acting out something different, and then maybe the reality of that is what we could be more aware of. So I kind of wanted to talk about, in my opinion, emotional maturity is not really a personality trait. They're not just born emotionally mature.
Right.
It's something that you kind of develop, right? And there are lots of reasons for that. I listened to several podcasts this week about this very topic, trying to just see what I was missing. And it's really hard for people to articulate specifically what emotional maturity is. And I realized even more so that it's a skill that we have to develop in our lives, myself included for sure. And I still have a lot to learn on that. Which kind of brings me back, like, I'm not a professional. I just educate myself in my own life. And then this is something you and I are talking about because it's interesting, and
Yeah.
hopefully that's interesting to other people as well. Um, a part of that is I don't think most of us choose our reactive patterns. We kind of are exposed to them in childhood, and then they become part of our personality a little bit, um, because it fits, right? People who tend to be introverted naturally fit into more of a personality type, that's quiet often. People who are very extroverted often fit into a personality type that they can be loud and really dynamic. And so those patterns of reactivity often show up in our personalities, but that's not necessarily an indicator of our emotional maturity.
Right.
Um, and so Stephen R. Covey, you kind of referenced the Arbinger Group last night, which he is lightly affiliated with, or last week.
Right.
Um, they wrote Leadership and Self-Deception, but he wrote uh, Habits of Highly Successful People. And one of the things he really emphasizes in there is first to seek to understand and then be understood. And that is something I've really worked on the last several years of having conversations with people and being really curious about them and trying to subdue my personal reactivity and ask better questions. I'm hoping that's kind of the meat and potatoes we can get to today
Yeah.
in our conversation. So I kind of want to reflect back on what emotional regulation is, which is feeling the emotions you feel without acting them out. So someone says something that embarrasses you, you get to feel embarrassed.
Right.
But if you get up and stomp out of the room, well, that's something different. And so if someone gets embarrassed, right, they'll blush, they'll maybe laugh, be uncomfortable. And that's allowing yourself to feel the feelings. Or it could be happy too, where someone gives you a present and you can feel so excited and happy about that. Regulating your emotion is choosing the reaction you have. I'll give you an example of a mismatch that I have sometimes. I don't feel comfortable getting gifts. It often makes me uncomfortable.
Sure.
And so when someone gives me something, I'm often like uncomfortable with that, but that's not a really authentic emotion, right? It ends up being kind of a secondary emotion. And I've had to practice feeling gratitude that I have authentically and just putting my arms around them or smiling, letting that be the authentic emotion that I felt, happiness and gratitude, instead of being like, no, I don't want to feel that. I don't want you to do that for me. And so I
Right.
often have that mismatch in my life. And I don't know exactly why. Um, Emotional intelligence is a self-awareness and a self-management that often includes empathy and repair. So when I'm self-aware that I have this mismatch, feeling gratitude in an authentic way, which I do feel gratitude. I just act out kind of inauthentically. I don't know why. Then I can manage my reaction better. I can be happy, which is what they want to see when they give me. And then I can be very gracious and thankful. Um, and that helps improve the relationship because they did this nice thing for me instead of me acting like they did something they shouldn't have, which was give me a gift, which is weird, right? So,
Right.
and then an emotional maturity is being responsible for myself, even though maybe it causes this overwhelm, like staying grounded, saying thank you, being mature, not overreacting and being effusive. Oh my gosh, you didn't have to do that. It can be a simple thank you. That was so thoughtful. The end. That's the maturity part. Um, so I wanted to ask you, and maybe
Yeah.
just let whoever you and whoever listens kind of think about these questions for a second. What's the most common trigger emotion for you when you're uncomfortable, something happens? Like in your life, would you say you tend more toward anger, fear, shame, hurt, or helplessness when there's this kind of overwhelm? We're going to say maybe negative emotion trigger. That seems to be better, right? And so just think about it. You don't have to, and do any of these apply? When you tend to feel those, that most common thing. So for me, I would say I often have moments where I feel misunderstood. And that tends to trigger this sense of confusion. Like I'm confused. And it will often escalate. And I'll be like, wait a second. No, that's not what's going, like, what is happening right now? Right. And then it's kind of a situation where I try to start controlling the situation. And so it escalates with me into control. And then I start to feel like, right. And so there is sometimes a story that happens. Well, that person was mean, or they didn't understand what was happening for me. And that's why I did what I did, right? We start to tell ourselves a story. And then how do I treat the interpretation of what's happening? Do I say, well, of course, this is the only thing it could have been? Or do I dip into a place of, well, maybe I'm not understanding what's going on, which is part of that skill that I've really tried to work on developing. Like, hold on, I'm going to pause right here, try and understand the other person. That's hard, right? Because I'm flooded emotionally now, maybe. And then do I give myself the benefit of the doubt, assign the other person motive? Well, they're just and motive can be maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe there's something going on in their life. I don't know. Maybe they've got this thing that they're holding on to from 3 or 4 months ago, and I need to dig deeper into this to figure out what's happening. Did I do something like are they holding a grudge? Right? Like starting to go into a place of instead of your amygdala searching for threat, amygdala is where it was the threat,
Right.
calming down and letting your prefrontal cortex go back online. Um, Sometimes it takes time to pause. Sometimes you have to, I'm trying to get better at having those experiences faster, where I go, wait. I know this thing. I know this chaos. I don't want to go into this emotional place for too long. I'm going to go into the emotional place. I just don't want to get stuck there. And then what am I protecting? Right? Like often that's what happens. What am I protecting? My peace, my pride, ego.
Yeah.
Often it's ego, right? My boundaries, my image. Um, I had to explore this probably about 10 years ago. I personally don't have a lot of image protection. Um, I have a huge issue with my boundaries being crossed. When someone lies to me, that's a huge boundary for me. I don't like that at all. Um, I know people that have like image protection, right? Ego mask
Right.
protection is often what it is. Like they don't want anyone to see them as not respectable or dishonest, compassionate, or whatever. Um, I know about myself. I can get me in the right set of circumstances, and I can definitely be a pretty big jerk. And so I try not to do that. I know that about myself. I'm pretty self-aware about that. To go against my kids, I'm probably not super rational. I don't have a lot of rationality when someone is unfair to my kids. And that puts me in that's really common for people, I think, especially women. Now, not as much as my kids are older and I feel like they can manage their own stuff. But when someone said something when my kids were young, I had to really pause and think, okay, how do I want to respond? And often my response was, thank you for the information. That's good to know. And then I could go away from it, right? I didn't have to defend them. I didn't have to protect them. I didn't have to that person in that moment. I didn't have to do that. And that was really
Right.
hard. And so those are just questions, like what's your trigger? When you're triggered, what do you do? What's the story you tell yourself to keep yourself there or to get yourself out of it? How often do you interpret your experience as the only experience that could have happened? And then do you give your benefit of the doubt and assign someone else as the victim, or are you the victim and them the hero, et cetera, right? And then how do you protect yourself? Because that's always what we do. We protect ourselves. And that's a good thing in the world that we live in to some degree, because I have a friend whose little girl got in a fight at school this last week. And She had like huge scratches down her face. And when she went to the administration, they told her she needed to cover her face and call for the teacher. And when my friend was telling me this, obviously this is like second, third hand, I was like, yeah, no, your daughter should absolutely stand up and protect herself if she's being attacked.
Hmm.
Assuming that's what was happening, right?
Right.
And who knows what happened. I don't know if you guys remember, but when you were little, I was like, look, you for sure defend yourself. You defend anyone smaller than you, anyone weaker than you, and for sure girls, right? You defend people who you're bigger than. You defend those people. In addition, you for sure should protect yourself, but you can't provoke this. And that was the problem
Right.
I had with my kids is it wasn't that they were victims ever at all, really. It's that whatever their mouth had been doing prior to that provoked the issue, that was what I had to figure out,
Sure.
right? Because my kids definitely were were provocateurs
Never wrong.
potentially
That didn't happen.
situation. Like how many days had you been picking on that kid? Just like, you know, very passively, not overtly, very passively. So those are just things that we have to look at the end of conflict. Like, what am I protecting? So, any thoughts, comments on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I see kind of a cycle in this, and it's something that I think as you've kind of broken down the regulation, intelligence, and maturity, I see this kind of pattern a little bit more. And I think we talked about it last time, but it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that, it kind of all starts at regulation, where you have to first become aware of how it is that you're responding when emotional things happen. And then I would say on top of that is you have to be, I guess, smart enough to I guess recognize what those triggers are, what those things are that kind of get you. I mean, in my case, it's normally anger, it's normally betrayal in some sense, it's normally kind of uh, it's anger. Anger is normally how it comes out, but it's like, okay, well, what is it that caused me to get angry? Now that I realize that I'm feeling like I want to be angry. What is it that caused me to be angry? And now it's okay, now how do I learn to become resilient or prevent or um, I don't know. I'm sure there's other words that I could use so that when similar types of things happen, that I can make sure not necessarily that I'm reacting, but I can handle those in an effective manner. Because like as you kind of said, if someone's picking on you, well, geez, I mean, Dad told me the story when we went to Texas. He was like, I remember when you were, I don't even know how old you in Price and like kindergarten or something. And he was like, I remember the principal calling me and telling me you gotten in a fight. And after he kind of told me the story, I just laughed because it was like, well, yeah, I mean, my son's got to be in trouble because he got in a fight, but the other kid was being kind of a chump, and my kid ended it, and now I just got to laugh about it. And I remember feeling like crap. I'm gonna be in trouble when I got home, but I don't really remember being in like having significant consequences. But I do remember in this kind of to the maturity part of as a kindergartner, I probably wouldn't have been able to do those things as an adult now because of years of experience. And I think this, you had kind of said this the last time we had talked, is that most adults don't even recognize any of these things that we're talking about. And I think that's kind of what I'm seeing. And I don't know why I brought up the story, just I thought it was funny that, you have to end a fight. And I've always been quick to anger, I think, if someone's picking on me. But in the sense of you ha as you kind of said in the beginning, you have to be aware enough to be able to even know there's a problem. You then have to recognize what the triggers are, and then you have to create a plan in order to move past those things. And it's sad to me because I think that the plan is the most important part, in my opinion. I think being able to get to the plan part is what's so crucial because that's what allows us really to grow and change. But I at least for people my age, and I can't speak for anybody any other age because I don't know anything else, or at least people older than me. but I don't see that too often. I don't see people really, I guess, actively working to make progressive changes in their own emotional status in whatever sense. And that's kind of what I'm seeing is that once you become, if you have the steps, it's really not easy, but you can get good, I think, at doing some of these things. And a lot of that, as you said, I think one comes with age, one comes with development, but I think a lot of it actually from my opinion, I guess my perspective would be, I think a lot of it is the mentorship aspect of it. You need somebody to kind of be like, which I mean, you and Dad have always done for me, and I would hope my siblings and anybody else would agree in our family that, I mean, every time I've stepped out of line, a lot of the times it's like, all right, bud, let's clean that up. And not that it's always, most of the time it's like, well, gosh dang it, mom and dad are a bunch of jerks. They just don't understand me. They just don't get it. And I think that's where people should find, if I were to say anything, as soon as that happens and as soon as I find myself feeling that way, it's because something is wrong. And it's not because it's the other person, it's because it's me, my pride, my ego, those things that you had kind of
Mhm,
mentioned.
mhm, mhm,
And that should at least cause for reflection. And sometimes maybe I'm justified. Most of the time I'm probably not. Most of the time I probably do need to make some changes because all of us do. But yeah, I guess that's kind of my general thoughts on kind of what you were saying is that cycle is important to recognize, and then getting that, being able to reflect, self-reflect is I think the crucial piece, which is your whole point of being self-aware, right? So
yeah. Well, and I really appreciate what you're saying, right? The cycle is the thing that makes you self-aware, and it's messy when you start into these
yeah,
kind of meta cognitive kind of processes, right? Like one of the things that I think is really important, especially in a marriage, is to look at your spouse and say, all right, I know that there are things that I do that I could improve on, and I'm open to that feedback. This is going to be really hard for me,
right,
but I want to give you permission to, as best you can, lovingly help me with
gently.
this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Knowing I have to make, anytime you work with kids, they're messy. Kids are messy. Kids do this emotional work all the time. We don't give them enough credit. And so, to your point, like mom and dad sit you down and go, hey, this thing needs to be improved. Of course, that's like counter to your ego. Your ego is there to protect you. But we're looking at you going, we know you could do better. This is going to benefit you. This is going to improve your life. So we're going to tighten this up a little bit so you can succeed more, right? And we obviously it's different now because we're in different roles, like we're not your full-time parent, but
right,
even still, right, like we're great people to reference to if you trust your parents.
sure,
Mentorship, I think, is huge. I think that's a really great thing. And then before the mentorship is the desire to want to
yeah,
improve, and that can come at any age. And I think that that is really really critical. In addition, I think the word we are both kind of reaching for is, what's the difference between discernment and judgment when it comes to emotions? There are times you should get angry,
sure,
but is anger the thing you use to get big and loud to control a situation? Instead, it's kind of what I say like spanking is. Spanking is really easy for parents to do because it gets control real fast.
yeah,
It doesn't teach if you don't let it teach, right? And anger is similar. It gets things under control fast until it doesn't,
right,
right? Until the thing you're trying to control becomes a bigger monster than you. And that's the thing we're asking everyone participating to kind of consider, like, are you a monster, and is it for good or is it for you? And that's kind of what I learned about myself is I had to get myself under control because it wasn't good for my kids if I wasn't. It wasn't good for my marriage either. And it really wasn't good for me. And so I had to start learning discernment and judgment in my own behavior. And that's what the self awareness brings. Everyone's allowed to feel,
right,
it's encouraged. I, in society right now, everyone's talking about men's feelings. And I really appreciate that, to be quite honest, because I do think that there is a generational component where men were told to kind of just suck it up and act tough. No, they should know what they feel. Women
And,
should too.
and they should suck it up and act tough too, right? Like it both, yes.
They're not, they can both exist.
Right,
And both people should do that, men and women.
right,
Suck it up and get your stuff done. But it's okay to be sad, or it's okay to be frustrated, or it's okay to be whatever. Now, what are you going to do about it? Right? It's not okay to take it out on someone. And I understand we're talking about different situations. Like when we're talking about war, that's that's a whole different
sure,
realm than what you and I live in.
right.
Right? There's whole different that's a completely different culture. And a lot of those, or starvation, or deprivation, disease, like we don't deal with any of those things. And
Right.
so we have these kind of lingering coping strategies that we're confronting, and maybe we're not confronting it well in society. But in this conversation, I'm saying let's do that and acknowledge that we're not acknowledging any of those things in our lives because we
Sure.
don't have to, thankfully, right? No one's starving voluntarily
Right. And
or
and
involuntarily. No
yeah,
one's starving involuntarily. We're all starving by choice.
right. But and I think to that to the other side of it is I think too often, even though we're not necessarily I think any emotional manipulation used in a negative way, because emotional manipulation, I think, is bad typically, but it doesn't, you can emotionally manipulate things for a good thing. And I couldn't think of an example, but that could happen. But I think most of the time anger is associated with dads because dads are normally the ones to get hot and bothered. And I think on the other end, being pitiful and sad and depressed all the time, which I think is normally kind of associated sometimes with women, is
Could
it's
be.
like, well, you can't don't hold somebody hostage just because you're feeling sad. Get off your butt and go do something about it, or
Well, and that's been the issue that I think is coming up,
right.
right? Like I just had a conversation with someone this week, and she was talking about masculine
Toxicity.
toxic masculinity, and I
Oh,
was like, nah.
okay.
And I was like, nah, toxic is toxic.
Yep.
If you're a man, sure, it could be toxic masculinity. If you're a woman, it could be toxic femininity. I don't
Well, but
distinguish like
even
that.
women could have toxic masculinity, right?
To me, it's
You-
just all toxic,
yeah,
right? Like anytime you're toxic, you're toxic. But we want to build in these political systems and these, cultural systems that we say, okay, men can't act this way and women can't act this way. And I just look at it and go, no, everyone should regulate your anger.
yep.
Everyone should act considerate of someone else. Men are going to probably tend to be a little bit bigger and stronger in certain things, and women are as well. And that's the problem when men and women compete, right? Not good. And I think women who would be like, well, I'm not a victim. Well, I don't see myself as a victim as a woman. And so does that make me toxically female? No, it just means I'm taking accountability for my life,
Right.
right? But I'm not out in the world competing with a man in a man's world either. And so situational awareness is really important. I think I realize this is a little bit off topic, so we can come
Yeah.
back a little bit, but just toxicity is toxicity. And that's when it comes to emotion, your point is right. Anytime we use it as a crutch, anytime we use it as a way to get my way, well, that's self-serving, right?
And I
And
think
so,
something, sorry
go ahead.
to kind of
No,
interrupt
go
you, but I
ahead.
think
You're good.
you had said this last time, and I know we're kind of getting into that as well as I find that people often use phrases like that and they really have no idea what they're meaning. I think what they're trying to say a lot of the times is somebody hurt my feelings and I don't know how to express it. And so I'm just going to use a buzzword that I hear everybody else using, but it doesn't. What I'm trying to say is I think when at least I found, because you, I think, have brought this up and I've used it a few times lately, is I'll often just ask the question, well, what do you mean by that? Right? Which is
Yes.
what you do, I think. Like, if someone were to say toxic masculinity, it's like, okay, I think I know what you're saying, but what do you really mean by that? Because I don't think our understandings of uh, maybe your emotional hurt are on the same page. Because I hear that and I
Yes.
hear you generalizing a lot of people and a lot of emotions by just you saying one
Yep.
word, because that's what the intention is. You're saying if you feel anything masculine and it's you look to overpower somebody, that's a bad thing. And I don't really think that that's what we intend. So what are you trying to communicate that maybe I'm missing? And then
Yes. And
I think
and
even
that's
from
a
there,
great example of emotional regulation
sure,
and emotional intelligence because you're implementing a skill set, very much so. And I think those are the two things, right? Because you feel this emotion come up in your body.
right,
That's kind of what you're telling me, right? Because even just right there, the tone got loud, you got a little bit big, and then you were like, okay, but I'm going to put it back down here and
sure,
I'm going to put my prefrontal cortex back online and say, tell me more
right,
because there's something happening in my environment that feels like threat, even though you're like, I totally know I'm not under threat, but that's not how it
right,
feels. That's a
totally,
feeling, right? And you're starting to feel things in your body. All of that's allowed. We should not resist any of that, but we should pause and go, literally, what am I feeling?
yeah,
I'm feeling anger. That signals that I'm in threat. Hmm. That signals I should slow things down. I should ask a question. I should move into curiosity. That's what I should do. That's the skill set. And it's a really great skill set to have because when you talked about like resilience, the skills are what make you resilient.
yeah,
The skills are what prevent the escalation and the explosiveness that then people attribute toxic masculinity to,
right,
right? That's what the skill set does because without the skill set, you lose control. And so as a little boy, you lost control and got in a fight at school. And then we teach kids fighting is bad. And so of course you feel shame. That's not wrong. That's what you should feel. But your dad didn't get mad at you, so you didn't have anywhere to put that. And you're like, oh, okay, moving on. Right. And so that's why that is a great opportunity for a parent to capture and to sit down and be like, hey, bud, you protected yourself. That's what you should do. And I just want to, remind you, you're a big kid and you're smart and you don't have to fight. If you get in a situation where you have to fight, then you have to fight and you got to finish it and you got to make sure that other kid's okay if you can. Like we're going to try and, temper the experience of the amount of force that we need in order to get back in control of a situation. Like
right,
that is something really great a dad can teach a son, right? You can hurt someone and you might have to, but let's not do more than we need to because we're not in war.
right,
But in that moment, you were in a war, right? So we teach our kids that, and that's really important, I think, for men and boys and moms. And so one of the things I want to come back to is this idea of ownership. Like
yeah,
ownership is very, very specific. It's taking responsibility for your behavior without hiding behind the intent of what was going on or making excuses or making counterattacks. Well, I did this because 2 weeks ago you said this, right? And so we've been holding on to this little weapon to then go right back at the other person. And now I'm justified. Instead, ownership names exactly what you did, why you did it, and not be vague about it. And if you're sorry, you're sorry. And if, yep, I've been holding a grudge and I should have talked about it and I didn't, and that's a separate topic. So now let's address this one and then we'll come back to this one, right? Separately. And so what I did, why I was wrong, or what was wrong about it, and how it was my responsibility. You're not responsible for anyone's feelings. You didn't make anyone feel bad. They chose to feel bad, but your behavior can impact someone. That
right,
can cause them to feel bad or feel negative emotion, let's say, right? Because, of course, if, let's say, I say this is a very small example. I'm literally walking in the door behind this lady the other day, and all she had to do was turn and hold the door open, and she just shut it. It's not a big deal. Didn't ruin my day, but I thought, huh, that was pathetic. That's it. And that's all I felt about it. And it reminded me, don't be like that.
Right.
Don't be small like that. Look around you. Hold the door for an extra 2 more seconds. And maybe she gets in line first. Uh-oh, right? Or
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
she's really considerate and lets me still go to the front of the line. I don't know. It doesn't matter that much. Like, I'm not going to let it wreck me. I'm not going to self-protect myself all the time. And so I'm saying things like what ownership is not. I'm sorry you feel that way. Hmm. I'm sorry, but you did blah blah blah. That's an attack. Okay. I'm sorry, but you always. That's a good one. Oh, I didn't mean it. Meaning it erases the impact. No, it doesn't matter if you meant it or not. That could help. That's just how I am. You know that. You know what you do just irritates me, and I just get irritated by that.
Right.
Those are all excuses. Those are all not taking accountability. And so why does ownership matter? Because it restores reality. It tells the other person, I'm not rewriting that this experience impacted you, and here's what happened. I'm not trying to make you crazy. And so one of the big things I know that happens is people act disrespectful, right? And so if you act disrespectful and you justify acting disrespectful in a way that makes the other person feel like they have to prove how what you did was disrespectful, that's kind of crazy making. A lot of times that becomes cognitive dissonance because you go, if the roles were reversed, you would be mad because that was disrespectful. But because it's you to me, it's not disrespectful. Huh. Right? And so then you start to go, am I crazy? And you might ask the question, well, if I did that to you, how would you feel? Well, I don't know. That's beside the point, right? And so you start to have these. So the issue happens, and then you start to have these other issues that start developing, right? That then make it this big confusing thing until everyone's exhausted, and then the conversation has to end.
Right.
And if you've been in marriage long, you understand that happens way more than we would like, right? And so the skill set of ownership is simple. Restore reality, acknowledge how your actions might have impacted the other person, and then take accountability for that. I was wrong when I raised my voice. I don't want to raise my voice again. We've agreed that's not okay. I dismissed you instead of listening. That's not who I am. I made a decision without you, and I understand you feel like I broke trust. I want to fix that. I said something that was unkind or cutting, right? Disrespectful. And to me, when I have had to come into this place, that's not who I am. It doesn't matter if I take accountability and take ownership for it. Because if I did it, that's now I'm at odds with myself. I know, I know whether I did it to hurt someone. Sometimes I might not have been listening. I dismissed you and I wasn't listening. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to come off that way. I was thinking about this other thing. That could we try again? Because I am going to make mistakes. You can't hold me to a level of perfection because I am 100% going to fail.
Right.
That's not even a question. I'll admit that all day long. So just own it. And then let's see if the other person wants to move on. And if they don't, it's over. And if they do, then we move on, right? It doesn't have to be an interrogation. And that's often what happens is we feel like we have to prove it. We have to prove. No, just let them have what they experienced. Have them say what they meant, what it meant to them. How can you fix it? Ask what they need and move on. And that's kind of what you're seeing as you talk about some of these big concepts, right? Is people are able to explain to you what toxic masculinity is. You start to understand what they need. You
Right.
start to go, Ah, I understand. You feel like you didn't get the promotion that you deserved because of these things. Huh, that's interesting. And then you can come into them and understand them and whatever. If you're in an argument with someone, again, same kind of thing. Okay, so you just told me I dismissed you. Tell me what you need. How would it show that I'm listening to you instead next time? I have this habit of like, I can talk to someone and turn around and walk away and keep having a conversation. Some people, that's upsetting to them.
Yeah,
And I can I can vacuum and I can clean the house and have a conversation. And that doesn't upset me if someone's doing that. I can follow them around or I can start, I'm like, oh, we're vacuuming. Okay, I'll vacuum, you do the dishes, or I'll do the dishes, you vacuum. Like that doesn't upset me. But for some people, they want to sit down, they want to make eye contact, and they want to delineate this amount of time for this conversation. And it has to be very, very direct and focused. And so once you understand that someone has a need like that, it becomes easy to figure it out, right? Because I don't need that, but
right,
this other person might need that. And so I care about that person. I'm going to give them that. But that's not what I need. I need something else. And so when I realized the other person, when they're not following me around and still engaging, I felt like, okay, so we're done talking. Now they sat down because they didn't feel like we were connected. Does that make sense?
yeah,
And so we can each have different needs or ways that we communicate, and no one's right, no one's wrong. You just have to care about the person and what they need in order to find the connection needed in them. And
right,
we're getting close to the time we can even get close. So I want to just finish ownership.
yeah,
You can't make someone take ownership. Ownership is something that the person owning it has to pick up. And so you can try to cross examine to win. You can try to re explain your side and prove how you're right. You can demand they get over it, and you can find all the facts and be a detective and prove it. That doesn't mean they'll ever take ownership because ownership is personal.
yeah,
And so part of ownership too is just because someone tells me they're sorry, if I don't feel understood and I don't feel like something's going to change, then I don't necessarily feel like they took ownership. One of the things I like to say is, can you tell me if I'm like at 95% understanding it? What am I missing? And then I'll tell them back all the points that they've made. And then I'm like, what else don't it? And I'm just trying to make it very comprehensive. So things like, help me understand how it felt for you. What is the hardest part? What is the thing you're struggling with the most? What's underneath this? What happened that I assumed about the situation that you don't like? What did you assume about me that is upsetting you still? What do you need from me right now that you didn't get? And so I'm really trying to do a comprehensive understanding of what's going on in the situation. And then that person really feels like they can take ownership or that I am taking ownership
right,
because we have this connection restored. That's the biggest part of repair is the connection starts to flicker back on. And so we go from ownership to kind of understanding. And then there are a couple more pieces like restitution and then behavior change we can talk about next time and
yeah,
maybe kind of summarize this whole idea of emotional regulation understanding. But this is the skill set I wanted to get to. So the skill set becomes this idea of ownership, understanding, restitution, and then changed behavior. That's ultimately what emotional repair is in the intelligence realm because you're going to make mistakes. It's not if, it's when. Other people are going to make mistakes. It's not if, it's when. And sometimes you have to coach someone else on how to have the emotional intelligence to create the resilience in the relationship to overcome things that hurt. It's going to happen. If you're married to someone, guaranteed. I had someone the other day come to me and say, I have a question about my spouse, and here's what's happening. And I don't know what I'm missing. And I asked a bunch of questions because I don't know, right? And then I explained what I know about myself without being specific because I knew exactly who they were talking about. And I asked, did that answer your question? Is there anything that I didn't understand about your question that I missed that could help? And they were like, no, I think that's going to help a lot. And then later on, they came back to me and said, that was it. Right. And I think part of it is when you're at this point and dealing in your very intimate relationships, sometimes you just need to ask the question, like, what am I missing? Like, what don't I understand about this?
Yeah.
And so, especially for men, the women are going to have a lot to say. Okay.
Never experienced that before.
So the job is just to hold the container for all of it to go in. And maybe you need to get a bigger container.
Maybe we need to
And
dump some out while we
well,
go too.
not yet. You want
Yeah.
you want to keep asking those questions. 95%, 95%. I take notes personally in my own personal life because I do get distracted, right? That's why I have an outline. Like I do get distracted.
Right.
And so that's the resilience part is using this skill set to understand, to own and understand. If it's conflict oriented, own your part, understand the other person, make it better. We'll talk about that next time, and then change. And so back to kind of just this early part, right? Like, don't mind read. You're not a sleuth. My therapist said something that was kind of sacrilegious and pretty harsh, and I appreciated it. And he's like, you're not a savior. It's not your job to save anyone. Not your job to be a Jesus for anyone. We already have one. It's your job to really understand the other person.
Yeah.
And you don't have to rescue, you don't have to fix them, you don't have to do any of that. You just have to understand. And it's been life changing for me to go, I don't have to control this situation. It can just happen however it's happening. And so for me, I've really worked on just being curious, listening, understanding, not attributing blame, having discretion, right? Having a sense of judgment in the sense of, okay, this is my problem, this isn't my problem. Um, Staying responsible for myself, taking breaks if I need to. And then when the other person gets curious, really trying to help them understand me authentically, being very open and upfront about what my motives and intentions are. I have issues with things when it comes to honesty, right? And so taking accountability for that can help me understand if I hurt someone's feelings, maybe that's what came to play for me. And so then I can be like, all right, that's something I attributed blame to you, and that was unfair. And so I'm going to pick this back up myself instead of thinking you're just doing something bad. And so those are all just really important things. Um, I'm going to come back to a couple other things next time. Like,
Yeah.
I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours, and
We could go a long time.
people's brain would fall out of their heads because they'd be like, oh my gosh. So if I had like a theta voice, I could at least put you to sleep, but I don't. So anyway, those are, any thoughts you have?
I no, I think that's great. I think I'm I'm looking forward to next week to kind of talking about some of those other kind of beyond ownership. I really like that's kind of that's one of those points. I think that's a lot of problems I see, and I think that's where, similar to kind of the cycle we talked about earlier of regulation, intelligence, and maturity. It's like it starts with ownership. If someone doesn't take ownership and they're still blaming somebody else and they're still holding on to things and they're still not being able to accept that they behave badly too, right? Because that I think that's the problem. Everybody's willing to admit someone else behaves badly. But we also, I mean, the hard part is admitting, no, I behave badly also. And that's where I think, I'm sure I'm going to find another pattern with the next couple things that we talk about. But no, I think that's great, Mom. I look forward to
Okay.
continuing the conversation next week.
Yep.
Cool. Okay.
Sounds
Love
good.
you.
Love you.